Hello again. Speaking as somebody, most of whose male relatives, that is to say my father, uncles, grandfathers and so on, were all soldiers during the two world wars, I am utterly bemused by the characteristics which the Ministry of Defence think desirable these days for members of the armed forces. In the description to this video, I give a link to a research paper commissioned by the Ministry of Defence with the aim of finding out how they might best increase diversity and inclusion in Britain's armed forces. The findings and recommendations read like satire, but I assure viewers that this is all quite genuine. This was released 18 months ago, and I shall begin by looking at page 1, under the heading of Summary of Key Findings. We learn, inevitably, that being female and or BAME negatively impacts the lived experience. Gender and ethnicity were found to impact the experience of MOD personnel to a large extent, with BAME females facing the most challenges. However, gender and ethnicity were not the only characteristics that impacted people's experiences. Other factors such as social class, age, position within the organisation also had an effect. And right here we see lived experience is capitalised. This is a concept that's just been lifted straight out of critical race theory. This whole business is very up to date and modern, as viewers can hear. But anyway, what can be done to combat this state of affairs? Who or what is to blame? Well, that's easy to see because the very next section is headed, "A white male prototype is pervasive and undermines inclusion." I had a suspicion before I even looked at this document that white men would probably be getting the blame for the state of the army. That is to say, the lack of diversity and inclusion in the army. Reading on, we see that, and I quote, "A white male prototype, often characterised by alpha male traits, dominance, assertiveness, a strong physicality, etc., was perceived to be pervasive across defence, particularly in the military, and was undermining efforts to change internal climates. This impacted white males who did not conform to this norm as much as it did females and BAME personnel, who all found it harder to fit in and reported challenges developing and maintaining their sense of belonging and advancing their career." Let us try to unpick this, as they say these days. I'm not at all sure why traits such as assertiveness and having great physical strength are considered undesirable in a soldier. On the contrary, I think these are vital qualities if you want your soldiers to be fighting on a battlefield. I think that under such circumstances, being dominant is no bad thing either when you come to think about it. But do the people who put together this report for the Ministry of the Defence want our army to go around winning wars? That's an interesting point to consider. Birmingham University and Edinburgh and Napier University had a hand in this report, and while I hesitate to characterise university lecturers these days as a bunch of left-wing layabouts, many of whom are quislings and fantastically disloyal to their own nation, one has to ask if the intention is actually to sabotage the effectiveness of our army and navy as fighting forces and reduce them to the status of lily-livered crybabies. I say this because still looking at page 1, under the heading of Research Requirement and Study Aims, we find this. The Ministry of Defence understands that a diverse and inclusive organisation is one that is stronger, healthier and more cohesive and resilient. Diversity and inclusion drives performance. It leads to better decision making and problem solving, increased flexibility to react to environmental changes and reduces the risks of groupthink, all of which are mission critical to meeting existing security challenges and threats. Well, the Ministry of Defence may well understand this, but it is anything but clear to the rest of us. If these ideas are taken as axiomatic, then we really are doomed. Let's think for a moment about the slighting reference to groupthink, which seems to be regarded as a bad thing. Is it, though, in this context? One of the things which helped Britain win the Second World War was that there was absolute unanimity among both civilians and soldiers about the aim of defeating the Germans and bringing down Hitler. Anybody who thought otherwise was dismissed with contempt and regarded as little better than a traitor. This was indeed groupthink, and without it we might not perhaps have won the war. What's wrong with groupthink when an army is fighting a war? Then we have the idea that a diverse and inclusive organisation is one that is stronger, healthier, more cohesive and resilient. Why would anybody believe that in connection with an army? In fact, the strongest and most determined armies tend to be monocultural and monoethnic, with all members sharing a common ethnicity and common cultural heritage. This makes it less likely that there will be desertions and mutinies, and more likely that all will be steadfast and loyal to the nation and the cause which is being fought for. If all your soldiers share a common religion, common language, and were born in the country and have their roots there, then this acts as a unifying force and means that the army will be more effective. The last thing you want when your army is fighting a war is diversity. It is claimed that being diverse will make the army more cohesive, that is to say more likely to stick together, but history teaches us it would have precisely the opposite effect. I think that if an enemy wished to ensure that the British Army was sabotaged from within and their power to fight sapped away, then no more effective methods could be devised than the principles laid down in the document which I give a link. The good Lord preserve us if our modern army were to be called upon to face challenges of a new Dunkirk or D-Day. Diversity in such a case, in such circumstances, would split it asunder rather than making it cohesive.